to another episode of Inside the Recording Studio. I am Jody Whitesides, and with me, as always, is Mr. Chris Hellstrom. How are you today, Chris?
I'm doing all right, Jody. What's going on? Ready to do this podcasting thing?
Am ready to do this podcasting thing, and today we're going to get into the weeds, so to speak, or maybe the meadow of EQ techniques, but not just standard EQ techniques. We are going to get into the meadow of alternate EQ ideas.
Yes. And obviously we use EQ in every mix, just about everybody does. But these are some ways that we can apply EQ techniques, not using just the standard EQ, but to get some really interesting results in ways that may not be super obvious.
Yes.
Let's just jump right in. And I'm going to bring up iZotope's RX.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody thinks of RX as this audio cleaning tool because that's essentially what it is. We can remove things, but clicks and pops and what have you. It is also a really, really powerful tool for applying some EQ to our audio because that's really what we're doing. We're removing frequencies.
Mm-hmm.
This is something that I do on the daily these days. And things that I've discovered with this tool is how you can get really creative with it. It's simple to think of like, oh, there's low-end rumble here, right? Okay, cool. Yeah, why wouldn't I just use a filter, Chris? Well, because now it's destructive. You can just go in and you see it, and it's right there, and you hear it. Nope, we're going to nuke that, zap that out, and then it's baked into the file, right? I guess caution people there that it is destructive. So if you're really not sure of what it is that you're doing, make sure you duplicate the file first. It's an interesting thing because not only do we have the visual element as we're removing stuff, and sure, we shouldn't mix with our eyes, right? But when we can see, so where is that fundamental that is clashing here or whatever it is, it's easier to fix.
Yes.
Other things, obviously, we can do, let's say that there's an offending frequency that we hear. We can then in RX use things like it finds the harmonics to that fundamental, and we can attenuate those or completely remove them if we have to. So it's a really, really creative tool. Now, when you're using RX, Jody, and I know that you do a fair bit, are you primarily using the sort of plug-in components of it, or are you using the standalone?
It depends. For the podcast in and of itself, I use both the plugins and the standalone for entirely different reasons. In fact, I'm using the standalone in our episodes, not for anything related to doing anything audio-wise. It's due to the new functionality of chapter markers. And when I'm editing the podcast and putting in the chapter markers before I export the audio file, I couldn't find a way from Logic, of all things, is illogical. It doesn't export chapter markers, but it embeds them into the audio. Oddly enough, RX, when it imports that audio, has the ability to separate the chapter markers from the audio and then export them. And that's how I'm using RX standalone on a weekly basis for that purpose, which is great. In other ways that I've used it, if there is a recording that I get from someone and it's done in a non-band situation, i.e. there is a click track going on, sometimes with headphone bleed or some other manner, the click track finds its way into audio.
Yeah.
RX is brilliant at being able to pinpoint that if you know what you're looking for, and you can go in and circle right over that little click sound and bye-bye click track.
Yes.
And it doesn't destroy the rest of the audio, which is absolutely fantastic. I do have a test file that we've talked about in past episodes where there's an interview that I have from microcassette that's set like feet away from the people actually talking in a really horrible sounding room. I use that as the test model for when new versions of RX come out to see how well it does on its quote unquote automated services. On the frequent though, in terms of getting files ready for a mix in the editing stage, should they need to be edited for sonic situations where you're talking about removing rumble or some other thing, mouth clicks, mouth pops, those kinds of things that are easier to remove without needing to pull it into the standalone app. I use the plugin for it. And then I listen to it and I have a setting and set it to that and generally try to do it as nonchalantly as possible, I guess is a good way of saying it, so that it doesn't do a whole lot of destructive editing to the audio, but removes the noise enough that it's either masked by everything else going on or unnoticeable for whatever it is that it's sitting for.
Yeah, that's the danger with RX because it is such a powerful tool.
Well, it becomes a weapon, as we've mentioned before.
Yeah.
Things that are a great tool can also be horrendously bad weapons.
Yes, you can do more harm than you are doing good. But one thing I wanted to bring up there again, because you mentioned the click track and the bleed there, stating the obvious here, but if you were to do that with just standard EQ, you would obviously remove that entire, or at least attenuate that frequency through the rest of the audio as well.
Yes.
So the benefit of doing it like this would be, no, it's just when that happens.
Just when it happens.
Right. That's a really powerful thing. Another thing that I like about RX is the sound design capabilities of it. If anybody has ever used their, when I say their, I mean iZotope's, either Iris 1 or Iris 2 synths that I thought were great. They might have been a little intimidating to some people because it's not, it doesn't look like a regular synth and it works a little bit differently. So
it was very different. Not just a little bit, it was very different.
But it was very, very powerful as well, I thought.
It was.
In sort of a graphic way, you can remove frequencies, not just static, but in any way you want to. You can remove frequencies. And that obviously creates almost like a drastic filter sweep that moves in real time with the audio that you no longer have to do with automation, which could be very, very cumbersome if you want to do, and certainly like this extreme with it.
Sure.
So it's a really kind of creative thing that we can use instead of just removing high-end or low-end rumble, anything like that. We can actually go in and get really creative with it as an EQ tool to have the audio just morph and do sort of interesting things. That's another great use for it as well. But I think it's a really powerful thing. Once you kind of wrap your head around how it works, it isn't as intimidating as it looks at first because it looks like something that just belongs on a screen in a sci-fi movie or something.
Surprised that hasn't shown up in one yet, as other audio products have for things that are totally unrelated to the sci-fi-ness going on.
Right. Yeah, Jody Foster calling aliens on an H3000 and that kind of thing, right? Yeah. So, yeah. So that's RX. Another one that is ridiculously powerful and a little bit more of a traditional EQ, I guess. But
it's more EQ style than RX in that regard. Yes,
which is Eventide's SplitEQ, which we have done an entire episode on in the past.
Well, yeah.
Certainly needs to be brought up here.
It's an amazing tool. There is no question about it. It is quite possibly another nuclear weapon type tool as well.
Yes.
With what it can do.
Right.
The idea behind SplitEQ is that Eventide has determined that you can split any sound source into its tonal concept and its transient concept. And the SplitEQ can then manipulate either pool, tonal or transient, based on what you want to do. You can treat it like a standard EQ and do both at the same time for the same amount. However, since we're talking alternate EQ techniques here, we're going to start talking about how SplitEQ can be used to do something entirely off the beaten path of a normal EQ.
Yeah, just the separation there of the transients and the tonal elements, I think, is just opening you up to not only just fixing issues, but then sound design and stuff as well. But we'll get to that in a minute. The immediate things that come to mind to me are two. One is obviously with percussive material. So if you have an attack that might be a little bit too prominent, or flip side, not prominent enough, right? You can treat that differently than, let's say we have a tom and the attack of the tom is too aggressive. You can then find that frequency where it's offending. You can attenuate that, but you're not taking away of the weight of the drum once the transient is sort of gone. Right. So
you're talking about attenuating the actual attack and not the tonal value.
Exactly. That is an immediate thing. Another thing that I think it excels at, let's say that you're doing palm muted distorted guitars. That can easily get really sort of like thumpy and just kind of getting in the way and muddying up the tone of the guitar. Sure. But if you attenuate those frequencies again, you know, that you lose too much of the weight of the guitar, right? So just kind of simply just turning down the attacks on that while keeping the tonal elements there is a great sort of like fix. Again, and I'm doing like air quotes here in front of you, I guess. How much are you using SplitEQ?
Usually only on problematic material. And as you stated, if there's an issue with the transient or the tonal value of it, maybe I like the transient value and there's something wrong in the tonal value of it, that's when I'll pick up the SplitEQ. I wouldn't say it's a go-to EQ for me in terms of an everyday use. It becomes a specialty use, which is why it's an alternate EQ technique and choice. In that, on the opposite end of what you're talking about there with the palm muted guitar type stuff, I might use the tonal end of things to actually automate the chuga in there that might be too muddy, but leave the attack of it instead.
Yeah, that would sort of be the opposite of what I might do, but
yeah.
Well, but different tools for different situations and how we approach them. It's an interesting one.
And it's another one as well, as you mentioned, in terms of transients for percussion and whatnot. If it's a drum issue, and I really like the value of the drum in and of itself once it's hit, great. If it's not giving enough of, not saying the click, but enough of a right off the top of the kick to give it a little bit more definition, that's where the transient aspect of that is. You find where the transient of the kick is for getting that value in there. And boom, you can keep the tonal aspect of the kick and mess with the transient. So it's slapping you in the forehead a little bit better rather than just kicking you in the gut.
Yeah. The crazy thing with this one, as we're kind of alluding to here, is that it has all of these controls for each band that you have in the EQ, right? So it's not like you're doing it overall. You can do it overall, increase the transients or the tonal or vice versa. Yeah, so it's really powerful in what you can do, and also from moving away from a sort of fixing type of a mindset with it. I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up the sound design options that this gives you.
Oh, yes.
Because one thing that we haven't mentioned as well is that it can also do mid-side separate for each band. It can also do panning for the transient and the tonal for each band.
Yeah.
So you're
Which
starting
is kind
to
of
get
crazy.
When
you think about it, you could have your kick moved and panned for the tonal on your left, and you could pan the transient to the right, which would be weird.
Yeah, I was going to say, don't do that. That's bad, but you could.
You could do that. And you could have it so that it's a brighter sounding knock on the right-hand side and a lower sounding oomph on the left if you really wanted to get nutty like that, which in the aspect of getting into Atmos mixes could get real curious in doing things of that nature. I don't know if they have it on their roadmap to actually take this into a surround or Atmos or 360 RA type of environment, but that could get really nutty if you did that.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of examples here as you're mentioning that, and my head is just starting to spin. So I'm trying to center myself here. It's a really, really interesting way of dealing with EQ, doing this. And of course, every parameter also that you have available to you can then be further automated in your
Yes.
DAW, right? So here's a whole other opportunity for craziness, right? This sort of gets into a little bit of the third product we're going to talk about here. It is how you can just overall increase or decrease, like I said, just the transients of a source material. So let's say that you have that percussive loop that you mentioned, right? And we like the sort of clicky attack that we might get. You can actually suck out most of just the tonal and then either keep those to transients or increase them to get just a really sort of like a percussive thing without it cluttering up too many of the other frequencies in your mix.
You want to get into a real kind of mind-blowing concept here? Let's say you want to use a percussive piece as a rhythmic guide for a sidechain situation to take another instrument and rhythmically divide it up just by the percussive nature. Now, generally, you'd use a compressor and you would sidechain it to your audio source, in this case, the percussive loop. But let's say you just want the attacks of that percussive loop, as you're just mentioning. You could take the tonal portion of the EQ and pull all of that out and just be left with much shorter attack transients and get really nutty with that.
Yeah. So again, the sound design thing here is open for it. And I would just say that when it comes to something like SplitEQ that is really so deep, much like RX, it can have a tendency to be really overwhelming, perhaps. It really is just imagination that puts the limit on what you want to do with it. It's a really, really creative tool as well as fantastic at sort of solving issues like not enough or too much transient in certain frequencies or what have you. So great for sound design, great for fixing stuff. And it's one that we both really like a lot and sort of like perhaps a little bit off the beaten path in most people's awareness, but it is a really cool one that should consider picking up perhaps.
I don't disagree. The next one that we have on our list here, and it's our third and final one of this particular episode, is Soothe 2 from Oeksound.
Yeah.
This is not technically an EQ. What it is a resonance style dynamic suppression unit that works on the fly.
Say that 5 times fast.
Right. It makes it easier to deal with certain problematic sounds, almost like a compressor that has individualistic EQ tendencies, I guess would be a good way of saying it.
Is that a good way of saying it?
No,
Okay.
it's not. It's not really a good way, but it is what it essentially does. And you have a limited number of bands that you can pop in there, and then you set this thing up so that when it's on the sound source, if it exceeds the limit of where you set your point and how much you want it to suppress, it automatically does it on the fly, therefore only taking out as much as needed when needed and not any other time. It leaves any other material alone. It leaves the material itself alone if it doesn't break your threshold on the band that you're trying to remove a resonance from. It's really good at removing frequencies from sound sources, to treat uneven tonal balances. Oftentimes it can be used to clear out mud or proximity effects when they're not desired. And it does it all on the fly. That way, if you're not getting the proximity effect on something or it's not muddy all the time, it's only affecting it when it happens, which is even better.
Yeah,
That's
I think
the way I
of
would look at
Soothe. I mean,
Soothe, too.
it's people think of it as, and I think they even call it like a de-esser, right? That's basically, but that's a really limited scope of what it actually can do.
Right. Well, de-essing is a form of resonance removal, so to speak. On a standard EQ, that's destructive across the board. You're removing that frequency all the time. With Soothe, you're only removing it when it actually happens, which is more ideal in that regard.
Yeah, it's a fantastic one. You do something with your vocals in pretty much every mix, I think, these days with Soothe 2.
Yeah.
Do you want to go through what you kind of do there?
In addition to using it as a de-esser when needed, it's great for that because it doesn't touch the original vocal signal unless it really hits that sibilant frequency that's harsh or
taking
sibilant.
your head off.
Yeah. In terms of using it as a side chain towards other instruments, you can use it to sculpt out room for the vocal and giving the vocal a bit more of a blanket enveloping vibe so that it's not just sitting on top of your mix, but rather in the mix, so to speak, and still being intelligible, legible, etc. And that's using Soothe 2 as a sidechain resonance removal machine, so to speak, where you sidechain your guitars, your drums, your bass, what have you, anything that might be near the vocal range of whatever it is with Soothe, and then you use the vocal track as the guide for that resonance removal. And only when the vocal comes on will it start removing elements of where the vocals frequencies actually are from the instruments in question. So you don't get over huge buildups in certain frequency registers, I guess is the best way of. This is
probably a great tool for people that are dealing with it. They're sent basically stereo files, then they record vocals over them. The question that I see a fair bunch is like, well, how can I make it sound like my vocal is part of the performance and not just sitting on top of it? Because that's basically what you're doing. You're taking the slab of music and you're putting a vocal on top of it. By using this technique that you're describing, like where you put it on your stereo track, I guess, and then use the vocal as a sidechain input to it, should probably make that process a fair bit easier, or at least more natural sounding.
Yeah, it's really good at that. And I use it 100% on just about every mix I've done in the last year with that technique. Dealing with vocals and such for that. It makes it so easy to get the vocal to sit in there rather than trying to determine, am I at the 2K mark, the 2.1, the 2.2, the 1.9, and using a general sculpting EQ to sculpt out that entire market from the rest of the instruments for the vocal. That was the old school way, and it's still a very viable way to do it.
Sure.
This just makes it a little bit more enveloping, as if you're wearing those, what do they call them, 5-finger shoes, the individual toe shoes, so that your toes are like sitting in a glove. Instead of mittens, you got gloves. That's the way I would say it, right?
All right. Well, that's fair enough. You know, we're mentioning vocals here, but the same technique could be used for, let's say that you do instrumental guitar music or whatever. It could be the same thing here, right? Where we want to make sure that the lead guitar that's soaring on top of the backing track is sitting a little bit better. We can use the same technique here.
I've done that.
Yeah, see? There you go. It's just a Soothe master.
I don't know if I'm a Soothe master, but yes, it is great for doing things of that nature. In addition to that, let's say you have drum kit that you've recorded and there's certain frequency or something happening in the room, provided you're miking your shit up and using live drums and drummer. There can be frequencies that start clashing within the drum kit. Well, they don't always happen. And if you use Soothe over it, you can actually figure out where those frequencies are when they happen and then set it so that Soothe just instantly notches that stuff out from the kit, and the kit will sound tighter and nicer because of it.
More natural. You don't have to do the sort of static notch where something is where it might take away from the rest of the kit, right?
And another thing that's really great about it is that just like the SplitEQ, you can use a mid-side function. Let's say you want to just affect the sides and not the mid. You could do that. If you want to affect just the middle of the mix and not the sides, you can do the same thing. It's a very, very powerful, in-depth, resonant filter plugin that is really good for doing things on the mix.
And as we're on the topic of Oeksound, it's not on our list here to talk about today, but of course they got Bloom now as well.
Right, but that's more of an EQ-y kind of thing and additive subtractive EQ rather than just the resonance frequency thing.
Right. I figured I'd throw it in there because we are talking about alternate EQ techniques here. So
that is
as
true.
A little bit of a side note to that.
Well, let's move on now to our Friday finds. Chris, what have you got this week?
I learned of something new, or a new product, at least to me, that I thought looked really interesting. It's from Lunacy Audio, and they have a plugin called Beam. Now, what Beam has, these little modules that fit in it that processes your audio, or your audio. It could be filters and reverbs and things like that. And they had a new module for this that they call Time. What this did is it really, really reminded me of Stutter Edit, the plugin, where obviously it's seemingly a lot easier to use, or at least simpler. Again, that seems like to be the theme of today's episode. It looked really interesting to me because you can rearrange slices and it has this sort of granular engine. So again, for like sound design or just doing like crazy stuff, it looks really interesting. It's something that I want to investigate a lot more. So my find this week is Beam from Lunacy Audio. What about you, Jody?
I'm going with the recently announced update from Native Instruments for Contact 8. That's right. Contact is no longer version 7 in terms of what's the new kid on the block. It's now Contact 8. It comes within Complete 15 if you want that. But it's a standalone player, and it looks like the interface has gotten a little bit of a UI update so that things look, quote unquote, more modern. Contact.
Interesting. All right, cool. It seems like it was fast because it feels like it wasn't that long ago we got 7. So
I think it's like been 2 years at least, right?
Well, time flies when you're having a good time, right?
Right. While we've got your attention, we ask that you go to InsideTheRecordingStudio.com and sign up for our mailing list. You'll need to be on our email list in order to be eligible for future giveaways, and we'll make sure you don't miss any future episodes of this incredible podcast. Send us an email at goldstar, GOLDSTAR, at InsideTheRecordingStudio.com with the phrase Alt EQ, and you'll get something cool back in your inbox. If you have a topic or suggestion for Chris and I to explain in a future episode, contact us at the contact page and we'll put it into consideration for a future episode. With that, I'll say see you next week.
Talk to you later, Jody. Thanks for listening, people.